Thank you very much. Thanks for joining the presentation, everyone. So I'm Hakkim, as she mentioned. So I'm head of platform engineering at Zalando. So this is a relatively short presentation, and there's a lot of stuff to get through. So it's going to be a bit of a primer to a few DPE concepts, but I've created an extended article with a more detailed exploration of a wider range of concepts you can find it at the QR code link, but I'll share it again later in case you missed it. Okay, so there's a plethora of DPE models. Let's start off discussing a few. So first, we have the DORA model. I think most of you are probably familiar with it already, but bear with me. So since 2014, the DORA team have been running large-scale surveys and consistently found that there's a significant statistical link between software delivery performance and competitive business advantage, right? And they made these findings public in the book Accelerate, which I think most of you are probably already read. And this also made the DORA metrics a household name in DPE. So the metrics themselves, the first two speak to the speed at which you deliver software, right? So, but that's not the full story, right? You got to deliver fast, but while you're moving fast, you got to also ensure that you're not breaking things. So the second two metrics relate to reliability of your software delivery. Okay, so far we've got 4 KPIs, right? But then in early 2021, one of the authors authors of the Accelerate book, she worked with some researchers at Microsoft, and they produced the SPACE model. So the key difference is that on top of the delivery-oriented metrics, so on top of the DORA-like metrics, we also have now people-oriented metrics. So things like satisfaction and well-being, flow, etc., are now into the fold, which is a fantastic thing. With SPACE, we have 35 metrics, right? So we've got 39 so far. Then in 2023, some of the authors of the SPACE framework then proposed the DevX framework. And the premise here is that if you really want to improve developer productivity, then you've got to focus on improving developer experience, and particularly focusing on these 3 components: flow state, cognitive load, and feedback loops. So here we have 21 KPIs. So already in total, we've got 60 KPIs across the 3 DPE models, right? So where do you start? Which of these models do you adopt? And that can be quite a overwhelming thing if you're someone new to the DPE practice, right? So what we wanted to do was to have sort of a simpler mental model that could help us reason about DPE and the productivity domain in general. And also a model that we could easily transpose on any of the existing models. So what sort of principles would you then employ to kind of conjure up such a model? The MECE principle is a great candidate here. It was developed by Barbara Pinto during her time at McKinsey, if you don't know. And it's a design principle for categorization that can help simplify complex data and domain analysis. And per the MECE principle, any data item must fall under one and only one category, right? So a good example of an application of the MECE principle is categorizing people by their age group, right? So in the most fundamental sense, if you think about product development, it can be viewed as just a black box product factory, right? And the idea here is that you have inputs into this black box, which are features and product specifications. Then the black box, which is the actual product factory, does its thing, right? And as an output, produces the features of the product. And as an outcome, hopefully delivers some customer value. And overlooking this black box is the affective dimension, and that's about how the developer perceives this entire materialized development workflow. So this basic black box factory model also happens to satisfy the MECE criteria. So looking at the different DPE models, we found this black box to very closely relate to Swarmia's breakdown of the DevX model. So Swarmia is a company that specializes in building developer productivity tooling. And of course, this is a slightly modified version, but it's a good starting point. And per their model, the first component of developer experience is infrastructure. So that is to say, the things that enable development execution, right? So this is the black box that we talked about. And so really, it's, if you want to condense it, it talks about building things in the right way, right? Using the right tools, etc. The second component, so we talked about the things that flow in and out of this black box, right? So that's the value of work. And here we are essentially referring to building the right things. And third, the feelings about work is the affective dimension that we spoke about. And this is about ensuring that you invest into the practices that foster creativity and psychological safety in your organization, right? So this is about ensuring that your developers are building in the right culture. So what is then a simple approach to get started? So really it's just to, or at least the approach that we took is to identify our top 3 pain points through developer surveys. And we try to do this across these 3 MECE buckets. So in 2021, when we started with this process, the top 3 pain points at Zalando, specifically the App Foundations team, was slow builds, right? So this is the building things the right way bucket, lack of strategic alignment, and work-life balance. So I hope you can kind of see how these problems, these pain points map to this mental model, right? Okay, so far you've picked the most impactful pain points. Now what do you do next? How do we effectively address these pain points? So for this, we borrowed a leaf from the product management handbook, and more particularly the North Star KPI framework. And the idea here is that we identify a single crucial North Star KPI, and then we identify a handful of input metrics that kind of directly affect or have a good probability of affecting the North Star KPIs. And then we brainstorm and identify initiatives that we believe will have a good impact on improving these input metrics, and hence indirectly the North Star KPI. So this framework kind of helps teams prioritize, communicate, and focus on impact. Yeah. So as an example, so here's Spotify's North Star framework. So as a metric, I think a KPI that's going to be important for the company is time spent listening to music by the subscribers, right? So good candidates for input metrics are average number of hours per session and number of sessions per week, right? So translate that and applying to developer productivity. So if you think of build time as the North Star KPI, good candidates for input metrics are things like pre-post compile process time, module impact ratio, avoidance saving, and build parallelization. Okay, so now you've got your North Star KPIs and input metrics, and you've identified initiatives that have a good chance to move the needle on those input KPIs. But it still doesn't mean much if you don't have buy-in from the executive decision makers, right? So next, I'll give you 3 quick pointers to help with those stakeholder negotiations. So in almost all organizations, tech debt directly competes for engineering capacity with customer-facing features. And that leaves many of you engineering managers with the unenviable task of having to negotiate buy-in for your tech debt initiatives, right? And here what we found is highly effective for engineering managers to speak the same language as the business executives, decision makers. So if you're struggling in this regard, an excellent paper by some researchers from the University of Groningen can help, and it presents approaches for quantifying tech debt in financial terms. So as a sneak peek, they identify things like portfolio management, cost-benefit analysis, and real options analysis as making the most, as the biggest shares. So the second tool I wanted to share with you for negotiation toolbox is Brooks' Law. So as tech debt accumulates, projects get slower to build. And a common fallacy that most decision makers bank on is, yes, it's slow to build things, it's getting slower, and I'm getting tighter deadlines. But if it really comes down to it and a project is late, I can just throw more people at it, right? But in fact, we know from Brooks' Law that practically speaking, adding more than a certain number of people to an already late project only makes it later, right? So this is something to socialize to your upper management. And the last tool I want to leave you with is this idea of portfolio management, right? So as the pic shows, you want to continuously invest into cleanups and refactors so that you have a sustainable, healthy development environment. And to achieve this, you need to track your investment balance and ensure that you have a balanced portfolio for paying back tech debt, right? So as the pic says, if you don't do this, then you end up with that. So if you don't already have a portfolio mechanism in place, a concise, intuitive portfolio categorization approach from Dropbox is illustrated on the far left here. So one of the great things about conferences like the DPE Summit is that we have many great DPE initiatives shared by the speakers. And at Zalando, we're trying to learn from them and to not reinvent the wheel. And one of the things we're trying to do is to curate a collection of DPE best practices from conferences like the DPE Summit. The idea here is that we eventually develop a DevX radar of sorts, kind of like the ThoughtWorks radar. So if you're interested in collaborating with us, please reach out to me. Perhaps it's something that Gradle could help facilitate in creating as well. So here's the link again to the more detailed, comprehensive deep dive article on mobile developer productivity engineering. Yeah, with that, thank you for attending, and thank you, Gradle, for putting on an excellent show.